Good afternoon, everybody. Bryan Norcross here with our Fox Weather Hurricane HQ&A. And today we have a special guest. It's Dr. Mike Brennan, the director of the National Hurricane Center, who will be here to answer your questions. And we'll talk about what's going on in Melissa and the hurricane season, if you like, or whatever is on your mind here this afternoon. Mike, thanks so much for joining us here. This is a fun thing that we've done this year with sort of new technology that we have these days, replacing when we used to take calls for hurricanes. So the idea of this was really for if we have a storm threat, to be able to be in touch with people regularly leading up to it and, find out what's on people's minds, the kind of thing that we used to do with phone calls. So in any case, obviously all eyes on Melissa. What's your take on the satellite presentation, which it looks just worse, if anything, than it did, certainly than this morning. And, we keep saying, oh, the hostile upper level winds, the wind shear is going to let up. It's going to let up. Is it letting up, or have the models been a little aggressive in doing that, or what do you think is going on?
Yeah, Brian, great to be with you. Yeah, the satellite presentation for Melissa has been not great looking almost every afternoon. And then overnight, the shower and thunderstorm activities kind of become better organized. And we've actually seen the low level center reform a couple of times and be pulled northward or eastward towards the strong thunderstorm activity. I think the shear is definitely lower today than it was the last couple of days. You can see the cloud pattern trying to expand out. There's a little more cirrus canopy, and you don't see quite as a lopsided appearance of the storm. But I think there's still 15 knots of shear, which is enough to keep the brakes on the system for now. But at some point, when that shear does relax, as the models suggest, and the warm waters there, and once that inner core develops and the circulation aligns, it seems like all the ingredients are there for rapid intensification at some point in the next 2 to 3 days, unfortunately.
Yeah, so it seems like we have two really serious issues here. One is the rainfall,
Yeah.
that odds are we're going to get dramatic rainfall, potentially catastrophic rainfall, no matter what happens with the track of the storm within the range of reasonable tracks. Feels like if you take Jamaica, maybe Haiti, Cuba, these nearby areas, maybe south coast of the Dominican Republic. And then the question of if this does intensify, you're forecasting a category 4, 130 mile an hour category 4. If it does intensify to that or even stronger, then we're talking about the relatively small core of the hurricane and the islands, right? And exactly how those are going to line up. And the question is whether the most intense part of the hurricane impacts the islands, and that, I guess, is unknowable at this point.
Yeah, I think the one thing we're most confident in is the rainfall impacts because they're already happening. And, even though the storm, there's an uncertainty in the track, it's not going to move a whole lot over the next 4 or 5 days. We're still expecting it to be 5 days from now, somewhere near or south of Jamaica, most likely. So that's days and days of heavy rainfall in those areas of high topography. The other thing to think about if we get a more powerful storm is you do have obviously the eye wall to worry about, those major hurricane force winds where the storm surge is going to be. But with a slow moving storm, you could have days of sustained tropical storm force winds in a place like Jamaica. And even hurricane force winds could last for quite a while with such a slow moving storm. Even if the core stays just offshore, you could get close enough that you could get a very long duration high wind event. And that can add up over time in terms of damage to things like trees and power lines and infrastructure, especially with the heavy rainfall. Those can compound each other and result in widespread power outages and other types of wind damage. So you could see a very, very impactful event. And then downstream, there's the potential for impacts in eastern Cuba, as well as we get into later portions of next week.
Yeah, Eastern Cuba and the Bahamas, although
Yeah.
by the time it's near the southeastern Bahamas, it should at least be moving
Right.
at that point. So that won't be a long duration event there, but it could be quite strong. And I was trying to think of long duration storms. I mean, when you think of Jamaica hurricanes, you think of Hurricane Gilbert in
Yeah.
1988, which was more or less a head-on hit on Kingston, right, in southeast Jamaica, and it was a horribly damaging storm there. But in terms of stalling storms and 3 day storms, I mean, I guess you have Dorian.
Yeah.
Well, in your time, what else? What do you remember that was a strong storm that sat? And because what happens is you get the rain, and then the ground is wet, and then the relentless wind makes more things fail. I mean, we've seen that on a much weaker scale in some tropical storms types of, in Irma in South Florida. We saw
That was
damage because it blew a long time, and that was only a
yeah,
day.
that was the other storm I thought about when I think of,
Yeah,
not that Irma was stalled, but it moved very slowly over a long period of time, along
right.
the north coast of Cuba. And because it was so large, that wind field affected parts of the Florida Peninsula for, more than a day of
Right.
sustained tropical storm, or even close to, strong tropical storm force winds outside the core. So, but I think Dorian, in terms of major hurricane impacts in the core affecting the same area for a prolonged period of time, is the one that jumps out to me the most.
Yeah, and Wilma, I guess, in Cancun
Yeah,
and
certainly is.
along, yeah, the Yucatan Peninsula. All right, let's take a look at what's going on now, in case some of the viewers haven't been up to date on what we've been doing on Fox Weather Day, and then we'll be back immediately with your questions. So here we are, the 2 p.m. Eastern Time advisory. There are 45-mile-an-hour winds. It's the estimate crawling to the north-northwest. Seems like the center reforming has had as much to do with the motion as any kind of movement of the storm. And there you see 1,001 millibar pressure. If you look at these little clouds out there, you can kind of see them blowing that way. So that's the somewhat hostile upper level conditions that are keeping. There's the center, nominal center, but look at the flare up of thunderstorms is still on this side here. Here you see, looking close up, here's how the European model analyzes the center, but this is that flow of moisture coming in that Mike was talking about already into Jamaica and into Hispaniola up here, and we'll talk a lot more about that. There's the approximate size of the wind field, the wind field being how far out do the tropical storm force winds extend. And notice they're all to the east and a little bit to the north here. That's because the system is tilted over. And it's as long as it's tilted over, it's not going to intensify significantly, but that's forecast to change. All right, so here's the moisture now, and the moisture flow up toward Jamaica. This is the European model depiction of this. You see coming south. So all these mountainous islands here, that moisture is kind of piling against those mountains, and that's what creates the rain. In Puerto Rico, 2 to 4 inches expected there. So some problems, but not on the scale that we're talking about farther west. All right, watch as we go here forward in time. There's tomorrow, there's Saturday. Now you can see it's starting to crank up on Saturday, getting organized Saturday. The thinking is that they will really ramp up, especially late Saturday, Sunday, and maybe peaking Monday and Tuesday. So let's go forward in time. Here you can see the movement on the European model. Notice keeps the core down here south of the Jamaican coast, the worst winds offshore. But boy, there's no guarantee of that. A number of the models, as Mike was saying, are farther north and really do engage the island in the strong winds. But in any case, the general idea is a strengthening system moving south of Jamaica. Here it is Tuesday, just kind of rounding the corner a little bit. But this is pounding the south coast of Jamaica with storm surge, extremely strong winds, rain. If this ends up being where the storm is, and then it'll turn north, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Here's the cone from the Hurricane Center, and you see we put the line down the middle just because it's such a squished cone, just to really see what the idea is. And here's the idea on the intensity. By tomorrow is starting to intensify. Hurricane Saturday morning, then intensity really picks up. Saturday night, Sunday up to Category 3, and just south of the Jamaica coast, but of course could be down here. Let's hope it's down here. And those winds are farther offshore, but could be right over top of it, and that changes the wind direction, and the moisture changes exactly where the heavy rain is. Remember, there's a big mountain there, over 7,000 feet in the middle of Jamaica. Then looking on to Monday and Tuesday, slowly moving by. So poor folks in Jamaica are going to get pounded through this whole time, whether it's extreme wind or it's just a lot of wind. It's just going to keep coming. And the idea is it peaks somewhere around in this time period. Yes, it could be stronger than 130. It really depends how close to Jamaica. Is it involved with the mountains and the atmospheric pattern? In any case, a strong, dangerous hurricane in that time period. Here's the Google DeepMind models. Then you can see they generally kind of go slowly here and then this way. And then at some point, turn right. Do they turn right over Jamaica, past Jamaica? A lot of them now turn right over Jamaica, but we'll see. I'll show you the average of all those in a moment. And here's the yellow in there is the GFS, and the red is the European. You see, they're all generally the same idea, but just a little different place where they turn, reference to Jamaica and exactly where they impact Cuba. So it just the timing of all this makes a lot of difference on who gets the worst of it, or if anybody gets the worst, if that stays offshore. But more and more and more of these possible tracks, these are all possible tracks, involve Jamaica here, the longer we look at this. Here's the simple consensus. This is what you guys call the simple consensus, Mike, TVCA, right? We just call the consensus. This is the old one. This includes the GFS, which kind of wants to be a little farther east. But then we look at the Google DeepMind, you see it comes down and then right by Jamaica there. If that happens, it's going to put just tremendous amount of wind and rain for an extended period of time over the island. When we take all those lines together and say, where is it most likely to go? This is the answer, south of Jamaica, and then beginning a turn somewhere in there. But notice there's a range of possibilities. It doesn't have to be well south to be much better for Jamaica than if it's very near the coast or essentially right over the island. Then the idea is it shoots on off to the northeast. The almost guaranteed disaster is rain. This is the model adding up the rain here. Notice the southern coast of Hispaniola for heavy rain, but look at here the kind of epicenter of this. And remember where it's purple up here, we're talking about in feet of rain. So Jamaica, the Tiburon Peninsula, and Haiti, maybe up into Cuba. So it's hard to imagine how we're going to avoid the rain catastrophe. Hopefully we can avoid the wind, but especially Monday and Tuesday, it's going to be hard the way these models are now turning it in Jamaica from south to north. So Mike, anything I missed or anything I misstate? Would you state anything?
No, I think you captured it pretty well. I mean, the one thing I'll add is, like you talked about a moist environment, and a moist environment as the storm strengthens is going to lead to a larger storm. So, by
Right.
4 or 5 days out, we're talking about the tropical storm force winds going out almost 200 miles from the center to the north. So even if you have a system offshore, the duration of the wind event that Jamaica is likely to see, at least tropical storm force winds, could be several days long. And as we talked about, that compounding effects of the rain and the wind and the wind and the rain combined over several days, even if that core stays offshore part of the time, could result in very significant impacts from a wind perspective. Even if you don't get to 110 mile an hour sustained winds, you may get days of 60 mile an hour sustained winds, which can really add up. So
yeah, and I mean, based on almost all of those forecasts, you're talking about 3 days, at least 3 days, right? And maybe 4 days of significant wind. So that's just an incredible thing. We hope that I know the Jamaicans are really on this, and but we hope that everybody is really paying attention because this is going to be something that maybe the few people have experienced that are around today. All right, Jordan Overton, is it?
Yeah, a lot of questions coming in from across the board. The first question coming in, we're going to talk about Florida. There's a lot of questions on TikTok too about this. Just in general, what's the situation for Florida? The Keys going to be impacted? Is this going to go into the Gulf? Can we kind of maybe clear up some confusion for a lot of people on that?
All right. Florida directly, but how do you characterize the any kind of impact? I mean, elevated ocean, I guess, maybe agitated ocean slightly.
yeah,
If it goes into
potentially. I
Bahamas.
mean, it looks pretty. The pattern is not going to allow this system to get much farther west than that sort of eastern Cuba, turn that we expect to see next week,
Right.
and so that would keep the direct impacts, east of the U.S. East Coast and east of Florida. But if you get a powerful hurricane moving, through the southeast Bahamas, it's certainly going to churn up dangerous ocean conditions. You could see surf rip currents north of the Keys, but parts of Florida up along the East Coast as we get later into next week could potentially be a factor.
Yeah, this is not a threat to Florida, the Gulf, except for the ancillary impacts in the ocean, based on everything we know, and we're pretty solid on that because there's a strong jet stream coming along.
Yeah.
It's going to push everything away, essentially. So we're good on that. Jordan.
All right, next question coming in. Now let's move up a little bit to the Bahamas. I'm looking to NASA outlook for mid next week, depending upon if the turn west-north happens sharply. What are we looking at there?
I mean, there certainly could be some impacts, but more likely southeastern Bahamas, Turks and Caicos Islands. Nassau will be a little farther west and maybe more peripheral. I mean, you certainly couldn't rule out some impacts there, I would say, at this point, but that's still talking about a week out. So it's hard to get very specific at this point, but just something you would certainly want to keep an eye on throughout especially central, southeastern Bahamas, Turks and Caicos as we go through the weekend and into early next week.
Yeah. So just in terms of the odds based on the European GFS and the Google AI model, you can see where the higher odds are there in the southeastern Bahamas. Nassau being right here. So what this map shows you is the odds of about 100 being within about 100 miles of the center, being within about 100 miles of any one location. So there you're in the 10 to 20% range of it being within 100 miles in Nassau at this point. But we're so far, we're looking way ahead now. This map shows through the end of next week. So well in advance, but odds definitely favor. Remember, we talked about the jet stream. The jet stream is pushing everything in this direction here. So it's going to want to curve to the right as soon as it starts to turn to the north. Right.
All right, next question coming in. We're going to talk a little about the NHC track. What is the confidence level in the NHC projected track?
That's a great question. For systems that are moving slowly, I think the confidence level in the overall scenario is pretty high at this point, that we're expecting this general northward motion, very slow, followed by a turn to the west. But as Bryan talked about, the details of that timing of that turn are going to make all the difference in terms of where the worst direct impacts are, especially for Jamaica. Where does the system go a little farther north and get a little closer to the southwest peninsula of Haiti? And when we get into that sort of Tuesday and beyond time frame, and when we do see that northeastward turn, exactly where that happens. Is it far enough west of Jamaica that the core stays off the west coast? Is it close enough, or is it over the island? So when you're talking about the core of a major hurricane, 5-10 miles makes a huge difference in who gets those very worst impacts. But don't focus on the track details when it comes to the rainfall. That rainfall is pretty baked in at this point in terms of seeing these potentially catastrophic, life-threatening flash flooding and landslides, especially across the areas we've talked about already, southern Haiti, Jamaica. This system is going to be large. It's in a very moist environment. That rainfall with that southeasterly flow or easterly flow hitting the topography on the southern portions of those islands or eastern portions of Jamaica is going to really produce that heavy rainfall regardless of the exact details of the track, unfortunately.
Yeah, if you think about the core of the storm, I mean, let's say the core of the storm is like that, right? Just a little bit of a turn down here makes a tremendous difference in the impacts in terms of the wind on the island, but it doesn't make any difference really, or much difference, because you never know where a band is going to be. They can just blast the same spot over and over again. And if it were to go farther north and turn, that would change completely the impacts, but you still would be within that envelope of moisture. I mean, I always say that for just developing, newly developed, just developing, or slow moving storms, the cone should be bigger, right? The errors are normally bigger. You have to think about the fact that the forecasts are likely to change. The details of the forecast are likely to change for systems like that, although there is a significant consensus, as Mike said, of this general trend. All right.
Hey, next question coming in here. Checking in on the Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic? What is the impact going to be from Canada for Saturday to Saturday? Do you expect flooding at the resorts or on the beach? Or will the airport flood?
Portions of the Dominican Republic are certainly in the area where we could see, as you see there, close to a foot of rain in some locations there. We don't expect significant storm surge in that area, so there wouldn't be as much coastal flooding. The high winds are going to stay offshore. But from a rainfall flooding perspective, certainly any low-lying areas or any areas that are flood prone right up against the topography there could see significant flooding impacts. Especially I think the Dominican Republic now all the way through into the weekend and perhaps even into early next week until the system starts to pull a little farther west. Difficult to get into what the localized conditions will be at any specific location, but the risk is definitely there for significant flooding impacts in the southern part of the country.
Well, Punta Cana is down here on this end here. So they're obviously the farther east you go, the less likely you're going to have as strong an impact as over here where the flow is in like this. But the coast is generally elevated. There are some beach areas and stuff, but there's general significant elevation there. But you have these big mountains there that are like sails to catch the moisture. And if that moisture is you're going to pound against those mountains for days, the rain is going to come downhill, and that's where the extreme danger is. I don't know enough about exactly Punta Cana, what the drainage situation is. Is there a river that goes through Punta Cana? I don't know. I can't remember. I'm not aware of one anyway. Maybe there is something I don't know about. But in any case, the water danger is mostly on the southern coast. And you can see the models kind of increase it here as you get closer to Haiti. All right.
Next question coming in. This one about cruises. What do you see cruise ships doing that were departing Miami Sunday for the week that are going into the Caribbean? What's the impact on cruises?
Well, I mean, I can tell you that the cruise lines know what they're doing, and they're not going to put you or the ship in danger, and they're going to try and give you the best cruise they can, right? I mean, that's the bottom line. But the odds are, and I think pretty much always when there's a hurricane in the Caribbean, the cruise ships do something different, and they take you on a different cruise. I don't know. Do you guys work directly with cruise lines, Mike, or do they? I know my old friend Craig Setzer is involved with one of the cruise lines and really helps them out. But I'm sure they interact with you to some degree.
Yeah, our marine forecast branch here at the Hurricane Center is in charge of doing those types of marine forecasts over the Caribbean, the Gulf, the Southwestern Atlantic, used by the entire marine industry, cruise ships, cargo ships, oil tankers, everybody. So they're a huge part of our customer base. And a lot of times you can go to these sites where you can see ship traffic and you can usually see everybody getting out of the way if you ever
Right.
go, and you can look at examples of the ships getting out of the way of the storm. So they, especially for something that's going to be of this size and this magnitude, they're going to do their best to avoid it.
Yeah, back in the day, that's how we knew where
Sure.
hurricanes were, is because some ship would make a note in a log, and when if they made it
Yeah,
to
exactly.
into the port, they would, we would find out, what they had encountered. And then when radio came along in the first part of the 20th century, then, they got the word to scatter,
Real time.
and we
Yep.
really didn't know a whole lot about where the hurricanes were anymore. So lots of stories from back that time about lost hurricanes because there weren't any ships in the area anymore. Now we do it a whole different way, of course. All right, Jordan.
All right, next question coming in is talking about Jamaica a little bit. I have a couple people on TikTok that are in Jamaica and wondering when they need to be prepared by, all that kind of stuff. But here's a particular one. How prone is the southern coast of Jamaica to storm surge flooding?
Well, Mike and I were talking about that. Mike, you talk about the communities in the bays along the south coast.
Yeah, really, if you think of a hurricane coming from the south, that onshore flow just to the right of the center, especially if it makes a direct landfall, you could zoom in there, into those little bays and inlets along the south coast of Jamaica, the one just west of Kingston, that is the sort of the one in the middle right port of the diagram, and then the one just to the east of where it says Jamaica on the map. That's another more prone area there. And then as you go off to the west, near Westmoreland, near Negril, along the west coast. Depending again on the exact angle of the approach, would be a could highlight or increase or lessen the threat in a particular location would be very sensitive to the exact track of the center. But there are some very storm surge prone locations, especially where the water would be funneled up into those bays and harbors.
Yeah, if you think about it, as the storm is tracking down to the south here somewhere, and the circulation is like that,
Yep.
at some point it's going to push the water kind of that way, and at some point it's going to push the water that way as it goes by, because the storm is pushing water out from a circle, more or less. So,
And the slow motion could lead to prolonged periods
right.
of onshore flow in a given location that can exacerbate that flooding, in addition to the rainfall flooding that might be happening in the same place right along the coast. So you can get that sort of compound flooding that can cause problems in this type of scenario.
Yeah, and this kind of terrain, I mean, here's the big mountains up in here. This kind of terrain, the water is coming down this way from the rain, and it's trying to go up the rivers or up because of the storm surge, and that's a really bad combination, unfortunately, that can occur. Yeah, so I mean, the bottom line is the wind to prepare in Jamaica. I mean, I think this is going to pick up on Saturday, right? The
Yeah,
wind is going to start to increase on Saturday, and
be
so it's
prepared tomorrow. You
yeah,
know, tomorrow, by tomorrow, wind, rain's going to start increasing. It all gets harder to do what you need to do once those impacts begin. So I think tomorrow is really your day to be ready.
yeah, yeah, and then and you got to be ready tomorrow to be in place until Wednesday at least.
Yeah, and that's
Um,
that's different than a lot of events. Yeah, you want to
right.
make sure you've got, we always talk about multiple days, but in this case, it's really multiple
It's
days of
extreme, yes.
supplies, of food, water, medicine. Be prepared for long duration power outages, and also the important thing to remember is that once those hazardous conditions begin, people may not be able to get to you to help you if you have a medical emergency or some other kind of accident or incident. So again, you want to be safe, stay inside once those hazardous conditions start.
Yeah, for instance, there's a road that goes along the south coast down here that feeds a lot of these communities. And if you have debris or something that goes down over the road, then that road is closed. So, and the odds are that something like that's going to happen. Exactly where, of course, there's no way to know. But yeah, this is a very, very, very dangerous situation, and being prepared to take care of yourself is going to be the only solution here. It looks like maybe even in the capital, that trying to deal with the whole country that is going to be subjected to this is really a daunting prospect. All right, Jordan. Jordan, your mic's off.
Yep. The next question coming in: will the Cayman Islands get a watch?
What do you think, Mike? Uh-oh, Mike, I think you got muted.
Sorry. Yeah, it's certainly not out of the question.
Right.
Probably a little early. Could be something that happens over the weekend or even early next week. It would depend on, just how wide that turn might be, and as it rounds the turn there and starts to move off to the northeast, could potentially see a tropical storm watch, if nothing else, for parts of the Cayman Islands. I couldn't rule it out.
Yeah, based on everything we know, the variables in the various models, some turn it up in here, but very few turn it out there to get the strongest part of the storm into the Caymans. These are the Cayman Islands over here. Yeah, it's going to be a close call. If it goes up in there, whether they get tropical storm watch, it's kind of a no-lose kind of situation, right? Because for marine interests, at the very least, they're going to be impacted significantly. The water is going to be high at the beaches and turbulent and dangerous and so forth. Jordan?
All right, next question coming in. I have more people asking about Florida, and one particular person who's saying all those lines that you guys were just showing, how all of them are basically pointing kind of in the general direction of Florida. What's the possibility that those can shift to the west?
So let me get the lines in that we're talking about. So this is just the Google AI model, just to keep it being a little less, the map being a little less complicated. So here's the thing that we were talking about earlier, is that we have this jet stream coming along like this that is going to grab this and pull it north. And this is a strong river of air to really drive the system. So that's why there's confidence. But if we look at even adding the European model in there, I don't see any indication. We did earlier. There were some of them that swung wide, right? Some of them swung way down here and then up around out there the last few days. But the trends have been to the east, well to the east of Florida. So anyway, I'm feeling good about it. And I'm a Florida guy, so as is Mike. By the way these lines work, if you just want to imagine, okay, what are the odds? So here's Andros Island here, right? And let me just zoom in on that for one moment here. So let me get rid of that and zoom in on Andros just so you can see. Okay, so what we have there is you have to do a little math, but we have like 4 lines over top of Andros Island, 3 from the European, 1 from Google. So each one, there are 130, nominally 130 lines between Google and the European and the GFS. 1/130th of a chance if they were all equal chances, which they're not. The European, especially in this scenario, European and Google are probably a little higher chances. So let's say it's 2% or 3% or some kind of, very, very low number in the noise of even getting as close as Andros Island. So that's why we feel good about Florida.
I was going to say, I can understand the questions though, because we're talking about how uncertain the track is in the first 2 or 3 days. And I can understand why people might say, okay, well, there's a lot of uncertainty there, but how can you be so confident farther out in time? And I think Bryan mentioned sometimes the large scale pattern that we see in this particular case is very well defined and very conducive to that sharp northeastward turn. Once it gets far enough north, it's going to shoot out to the northeast very quickly. And that's why we're, confident that it's going to stay, well east of Florida at this point.
Yeah, it's a real thing that sometimes you have less confidence in the details of the early part of the forecast than you do in the details of the latter part of the forecast. Because when you don't have strong steering, small things can deflect it one way or the other that can make a difference. But when you have strong steering, like this jet stream dip coming along, then then you have higher confidence. Here we can look at that jet stream. Here you go. So here's where we are today, and what we have here is the European model with the National Hurricane Center forecast on top of it. So then we go forward in time, and you see there's some divergence between the Hurricane Center and what the European model says, but not that much, both south of Jamaica. But here, when we get here to Tuesday, we go wide, and you can see this dip here coming down, so that as this begins to go north, this dip is going to grab it. And this is just screaming air here across Florida and across the Gulf, pushing out that way. It's down in here that the details are uncertain, because you have just not a whole lot of wind pushing one way or the other. Actually, you have 2 high pressure systems. It's kind of stuck between them. If you notice over here, we have a high here. This is a high going this way. And over here, we have this high in here going that way. So the wind going that way. So the storm is caught in between them. And that's why when it's far south, it's uncertain. But as it gets farther north, then it's going to get involved in this and get shoved out to sea. So, and this, by the way, might produce a significant nor'easter up in here. This is a lot of energy dipping down. So that's a separate possibility. I was asked earlier whether somehow these 2 things could be related or influencing one another. I don't think so. It looks like they're far enough apart. But this, when we get a strong dip in a jet stream like this is what forms a nor'easter scenario along the coast for late next week. So that's another thing. And some of the models actually show that being very, very, very strong. While we're talking about that, Mike, we had that scenario recently with the non-tropical, super annoying storm. Do you guys wrestle with that? Whether like where the edge is that you want to get involved? Because obviously, when the Hurricane Center speaks, then the voice is louder, just because of the way the world works.
Yeah. It depends on the situation. That was one where it was very clear cut not tropical. And so that was one where we were, from the very beginning, it was very clear that that was not going to be something that we would be interested in trying to handle with the tropical cyclone hurricane product suite. There are other systems that are a lot closer to that line. It's not even a line. There's a spectrum of cyclones, and there's this kind of murky middle place where you have systems that are kind of between hurricanes and nor'easters, where it's a little more difficult to decide how to handle them. We really try to think of it from a service perspective. A lot of times we can have systems that are in a borderline scenario, but the hazards are already covered with other watches and warnings, and it's easier to leave those in place and let the event play out. On the other hand, if we have something that starts off tropical and then transitions to non-tropical, we can keep the tropical hazards up to maintain that continuity of service. So there's events where it's more difficult. That was not one of them, at least thankfully for this case. So.
Yeah. So they evaluate these things, and the communications is an important part of it. As a matter of fact, Sandy was one of those complicated systems that was, essentially a nor'easter with a tropical system in the middle of it. So it was like a weird kind of hybrid system, actually, kind of like the perfect storm, same kind of weird kind of hybrid system. And what do you do with those? Well, as a result of Sandy, the system communication system has been improved to be less disjointed. So
we have a lot more flexibility to handle system either way now, whereas we didn't at the time of Sandy. And if we had another system like that, we would be able to keep hurricane warnings up or storm surge warnings for a system of that magnitude transitioning. But we have the flexibility to kind of handle it either way depending on the situation.
Right. All right, Jordan.
All right, I have a ton of people that have joined us from Jamaica. A lot of them asking what their specific impacts are going to be. Do they need to evacuate? They heard Cat 4, possible Cat 5. Is that a possibility? Can we maybe just do a quick focus in on what exactly these Jamaica impacts will be?
All right, so Mike, let me get the map up here, and I guess, we can't be very specific. We can't be locally specific, right? But that the Jamaicans, I know you guys are in touch with the Jamaicans, and we had them on the chief of emergency services, was it earlier today? We had them on Fox Weather. I mean, they're on top of it, and so you got to pay attention to what they are telling you about their local area. How confident are you that folks in the Caribbean are experienced in knowing the kinds of things that we know about? If the wind is going this way, it's likely to create this kind of moisture, which is going to run downhill. I mean, is that do our friends down there have the benefit of that kind of technology like we have in this country, or to what degree do you know?
I think so. And I mean, we do a lot of great coordination with all the meteorological services throughout the Caribbean. We have a lot of interaction with them through the WMO, through the Hurricane Committee, through training classes. So we have that kind of exchange, when it comes to tropical cyclones, at least. But, these folks are forecasting for these areas every day. So they know what their risks are. They know where the topography is, where the hot spots are, where the dangerous scenarios are. And it would and to get down to that local level of impacts, it's not any different than if we had a storm affecting the United States. We're always going to tell you to listen to your local government officials, your local emergency management, your local media. They're going to tell you what kind of evacuations might be ordered, what you need to do to keep yourself safe, where you can go to get to a safe location. That's really handled best at that local level within that country at this point. But the rainfall threat is there for the entire island, especially the eastern part in the short term. The storm surge threat potentially along the south coast if we have the core passing near or making landfall. And from a wind perspective, you get up to Category 4, you're talking about the potential, if the core comes on shore, of catastrophic damage, building failures, roofs blown off, tree fall, just a very dangerous situation. And again, the duration of the wind event and the rain event from this event, from Melissa, are going to be probably different than what a lot of people have experienced. I was thinking back to Beryl last year, made a close approach to Jamaica.
Right.
Didn't quite make landfall, but got close enough for some impacts. I think what you see from Melissa is going to be substantially worse certainly from a duration perspective and likely from a magnitude perspective as well.
Yeah, so if you look at that, I mean, just look at that rainfall map there, and the purple areas are up here. So the dark red, this is all the dark red is over in here. You see all this, that dark red, that's up to 2 feet, right? And then when you get in the purples, you're up into the 2.5 to 3 feet of rain,
Yeah.
And then I was just looking to see because I was around for Hurricane Gilbert, but I don't remember the details. But Hurricane Gilbert was moving along, and Hurricane Gilbert was devastating in Jamaica. Hurricane Gilbert went, I don't know, something like that across the island. So Kingston is over in here, and Montego Bay is up in here, right? That's up that on that part of the island. So but obviously there are towns and all over the island. But look at this purple, which probably is caused by when the storm is over here in the why did I put an L there? But let's say the storm center is over there, and the circulation is like this, feeding moisture up in there when it's at its strongest in that Monday, Tuesday timeframe. If it misses to the south, so it's feeding moisture, and no doubt there's something about the way the mountains are there that it's catching it or something. But over in here, look at these purples on the eastern end of the island. I mean, this is like feet and feet of rain because of the relentlessness of this. So, I mean, it's really hard to imagine there's no place that can deal with that. We can't deal with that in this country.
Anywhere. Yeah. And it's hard for people to visualize what that kind of rainfall is going to do in their community because you probably haven't experienced it. So places will flood that have not flooded before. You'll see water in places. You'll see landslides, road closures, like we talked about. So it's going to be impactful in just about every imaginable way possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And so in Kingston, there's some protection there of the harbor, but it really depends on the way direction the wind is going. I mean, the water still can get in there, and the river and that comes down through there and so forth. So the water is going to be coming down that river, and it's going to be trying to go back up that river, and it's a bad situation. Generally, fairly elevated along the coast, but there's elevated and then there's elevated, depending on where the water is coming from. Right? There is nothing good here. All right. What else you got, Jordan? Is there anything else we can add? I don't know what else to add for the folks in Jamaica. I mean, you feel like, because here we are Thursday. Tomorrow is the really preparation day. Saturday, this is going to begin, especially probably later in the day on Saturday. And obviously beginning from east to west across the island. I don't know what else we can do for them.
And then the fact that it's going to last all weekend and into early next week, and it's going to be a long duration event like most people there are probably not experienced. And it's going to be very important to, if you live in a place where it typically floods, you would probably want to think about going someplace where it's safer. But again, listen to the local officials there. The emergency management, the government officials, the Met Service, they'll have that sort of localized information for your particular community.
Yeah, this situation is potentially so extreme that this doesn't feel like something that people would say, oh, this isn't going to be that bad, right? Because there's no evidence at all that this is going to be anything but really bad, like really bad to spectacularly catastrophic. Right? Somewhere in that range, not in the maybe not too bad to pretty bad range. This is in the top end of the range based on everything that we know right now. So hopefully that will get lots of people. Jordan says that nearly half of the folks watching on TikTok are watching from Jamaica. So we're thinking about you guys. I wish there was something more we could do. I mean, this is full on preparation. I mean, there are no reservations, no hoping that it's not going to happen. If you're in an area that's ever flooded in the history of the world, then you need to not be there.
I will talk about what we are doing here. What we do for a storm like this. We've got the hurricane on our aircraft flying into the storm, both the Air Force reserves and NOAA. collecting as much data as we can to help improve the forecast. And we know that that aircraft data really does make a difference in the models and in our forecast and our assessment of a storm. And it's really valuable to have the aircraft in the storm when a storm's rapidly strengthening, like we think Melissa's going to do over the next 2 or 3 days. So we're going to keep the aircraft in there as much as possible, collecting as much other data across the area as we can, and constant coordination with the meteorological service there to make sure we've got that information exchange between us and them is really solid.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, we're going to have good information, but, in Jamaica, just be aware that there may come a time when you're not going to be informed and you're going to be taking care of yourself. If you lose cell service, you lose internet, you lose power, communications, and so forth. So, Mike, I know we're up against your time, so I don't want to keep you. If you got to run, or whether you can take another question or two, it's up to you.
I can do 1 or 2 more.
Okay. Yeah. All right, Jordan.
All right, so our last question here is that can relate to the NHC a little bit. The worst is still expected for the Dominican Republic, or is it no longer in danger? You may recall the cone kind of was a little bit more to the north. Now it's more to the west. What about the Dominican Republic? Are they still in danger?
All right, Mike.
Yeah, I think from the perspective of the Dominican Republic, there's not much of a wind threat there. The core of this storm is going to continue to move away. But from a rainfall perspective, southern parts of the Dominican Republic still expected to see 6 to 12 inches of rain through Sunday, possibly more beyond that. And that's still the type of rainfall, as Bryan showed earlier, could result in life-threatening flash flooding and landslides. So the rainfall threat is still there for those areas, regardless of what the cone says, regardless of exactly where the center is going to move. Again, this storm is not going to move a lot between now and even over the weekend and into early next week. So that fetch of moisture coming up from the south towards the southern coast, and particularly the Dominican Republic, is going to continue for several days. Other parts of the island looking at still some impacts, but generally less rainfall as you go to the north side of the island, more on the order of 2 to 4 inches rather than 6 to 12, at least through the weekend.
Yeah, so Santo Domingo is right here. So the mountains are to the north. So the moisture comes in here, hits those mountains, then it all has to run down. And of course, right through the center of Santo Domingo is the river there. And although Santo Domingo is well elevated, in general, the water coming out of the mountains is coming down. So you got to go somewhere. So a threat of that. All right, Jordan, one more for Mike.
Yeah, last one for Mike here. It's one last. Do you still feel that it is possible that this could turn into a Category 5?
So I've been saying it's possible, right?
Anything's possible. And I'll say once you get up into Category 4, 115, 120, 125 knots, the ability to predict fluctuations in intensity at that range of storm is limited. You can have eye wall replacement cycles. You can have very, very quick changes in intensity. And so when we get up to that range, we'll often say fluctuations in intensity are going to happen. And those can be 10 or 15, 20 miles per hour either direction on the scale of just a few hours. So is it possible? Sure. This is an environment where if the center stays offshore of Jamaica, if it goes over land, that's going to interrupt the intensification process. But if it stays south and is in that warm water environment, that shear drops off, that's certainly something that can't be ruled out. So, but again, the impacts from the rain are coming regardless of what category this is. There's not a lot of difference between a Category 4 and a Category 5 landfall in terms of wind and storm surge. They're both catastrophic. So I don't want people to get too hung up on that distinction, because it's often a distinction without a difference.
Yeah, and the Category 5 winds are in a very narrow area unless you have a unusual situation like the Dorian situation, where it just happens to sit where those worst winds are in the same place. But that was the Bahamas, not a mountainous island. So if it is sitting that close to the mountain, it's going to get disrupted to some degree in any case. So that Dorian scenario would not play out here. All right, Mike, let you go. And thanks so much for being part of this afternoon. I know everybody appreciates it and appreciates the work you guys are doing there at the Hurricane Center.
Thanks, Bryan. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care. All right. We'll continue on here. Let me just check and see if we have a new advisory from the Hurricane Center in at 5 o'clock, and we'll bring you up to date on that. Yes, we do. There it is. Okay. 45 mile per hour winds is the Estimate right now, still moving north-northwest at 2 and 1,001 millibars. So no changes there to speak of. So let me see if we have the details in on the forecast, and we can go over them right now if we have them. Let me see. Let me see. No, I still have the 11 a.m. discussion on the public advisory. Still have. All right. So our computer system at Fox Weather gets the update just before you get it online. So we don't have the details, but there you are. Now I can look at the new cone. It may be a little nasty looking, but let's take a look here. You're looking at this with me. Okay. So you can see that the wind speeds are kind of all over the place here, but just look at what it says. So in any case, the forecast is very similar. Notice that we're talking about it moving to the north and then bending to the west. And so here we are on Thursday afternoon. So Friday afternoon, that's the one that's hidden over here. The forecast is for 60 miles per hour. Saturday afternoon, forecast for 90 miles an hour. So Saturday afternoon is somewhere here. Sunday morning is somewhere here, 115, and Sunday evening somewhere here at 130. So this is slower than it was, a little bit slower, I think, than it was earlier today. I'm going to be really interested to see what the thinking is of the forecasters there at the Hurricane Center. Let me see. Nope, don't have the
No changes to
thinking.
the alerts or anything, Brian.
Yeah, I just see the public advisory just popped up here. Yeah, no changes. So hurricane watch for the Tiburon Peninsula in Haiti and up to Port-au-Prince, and for Jamaica, tropical storm warning in those areas as well. In other words, expect tropical storm force, be ready for hurricane force. That's the idea. All right, let's look at the rest of the cone here and see what that looks like. Okay, so you're starting to see by late Tuesday that bend around. So if you look at the absolute forecast, which is the center line track here, it brings it up very near the west end of Jamaica. Obviously, there is uncertainty in exactly where it's going to go. That's why the cone gets pretty wide. And, could it swing like this? Absolutely, it could. Could it swing over the island? Absolutely, it could. That's what all those models are indicating. But notice their peak forecast now is 145. So strong category 4 as of late on Tuesday. This is the way when it comes in raw, folks. This is what we get. So here you see the Monday. So here's Monday. It goes over with this line here. So Monday 145, Tuesday 145. So we're talking about a strong Category 4 hurricane. To answer the question, could this be a Category 5? Yes, it could, because a number of the models forecast a Category 5. And when you have a Category 4 145, that's essentially 10% stronger, and you have a Category 5, and the forecast is never better than 10%. So it certainly is in the realm of possibilities. But as Mike said, this detail isn't something to focus on. The bottom line is that all indications are this is going to be just a hellacious event on Jamaica of this extended duration. So beginning late on Saturday, really picking up on Sunday, with the peak on Monday and Tuesday. And the entire time, and before that, the moisture is coming in and it's raining. So this is not a situation where leading up to the event, the weather is going to be good. So, you're going to have to, resolve is going to be required tomorrow to, get set up to be in place by Saturday afternoon. I'm just checking here for the discussion from the Hurricane Center. All right, do you have a question while we're waiting for that to come in? And let's hang on and wait for that so we can go through it with everybody.
Yeah, I think a good question coming in here. It says, why does the storm look like it's going northeast while the models say it's going west? So obviously it's going slow. Maybe talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's not going northeast. I mean, it's forecast to kind of drift around a bit. The thing is that the center keeps reforming related to the thunderstorms because it was kind of a broad center. So they have north northwest average movement. We'll see when we can get their 5 p.m. discussion what exactly the thinking is there. But the center from the hurricane hunters. Let me see. Is there a plane out there? There's a plane just leaving this en route, a NOAA plane coming out of Lakeland, and there's still maybe there's still a an Air Force plane in the storm. But in any case, what it's telling us is that they kind of measure where the center is from the aircraft. They drop these instrument packages called dropsondes down through the center of the storm. They try and get it right in the center, and it's just kind of dancing around. So it's not really moving. When if you're looking at this, look at this here. Let me zoom this out a little bit, and let me see. I gotta. All right, here we go. Okay, zooming it out a little bit. Now, if you look at this and you say, okay, what direction is this moving? It takes a minute for it to get cached up here. It looks like, oh, that's moving out that way, but that's not the storm. What counts is what's going on here, and it's under these clouds that counts. That's where the center is. That becomes obvious once the storm gets organized. But in a disorganized storm, different parts of it can look like they're moving in different directions, but that's not actually where the storm is moving. The best calculation is that essentially has been stationary all day. I mean, north-northwest at 2 miles an hour is essentially stationary or moving around and kind of reforming. It's not a well-developed center at this point. All right, let me check in here on our friends at the Hurricane Center, and let me see, where did I do it? All right, hold on just a second. There we go. Nope, not yet.
Yeah, I think it's still processing or coming in potentially.
Yeah. So, well, it's not 5 o'clock yet. Usually they're done it, but there's a lot to say, yeah. And I know that the folks at the Hurricane Center have the same sense of this that I do. Is how do we avoid a horrendous situation? How can we limit how bad it's going to be on Jamaica? I don't think there's any way to avoid just a terrible storm, Gilbert level storm on Jamaica, maybe worse than Gilbert, because although it really depends, because Gilbert hit Jamaica head on, so the worst winds went across Jamaica. In this case, we don't know that the worst winds are going to go across the island. If you take the absolute line of the National Hurricane Center forecast, don't say, okay, there's no errors, they know exactly where it's going. The western end of Jamaica is going to get blasted with very strong wind. And the eastern end maybe not the strongest. But you just can't count on that. If it's a little farther north, then it's going to be a Gilbert scenario of from Kingston all the way west, the strong band of wind goes across the island. Now, a little difference here is that this system is moving slowly, so the mountain interaction in terms of the wind will hurt the system more. In Gilbert was moving along, so it just kind of blasted by Jamaica and over Jamaica. This was 1988, and it was horrible. There was a tremendous number of thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of homeless people, and it was just horrendous. In South Florida, there was a huge effort to try and help down there and get housing for folks and stuff like that. But this is a different scenario because it's moving slowly. Yeah, Jordan?
Yeah, just after kind of talking about the Caribbean in general, what about Belize down into Central America? Any concern that it's going to not curve and keep going west, or are we pretty confident in that curve?
We're high confidence that Belize is going to be okay. The Caribbean is going to be very agitated next week. So the beach communities, you may see elevated tides, bigger than normal waves, and so forth, because with a storm of this intensity sitting in the Caribbean, it puts out a tremendous amount of energy. So you're going to be aware that there's a hurricane out there, but we don't have any concern. Just like Florida, we don't have any concern that this is going to have direct impact in those areas. All right, I'm still.
Can you talk a little bit about the actually Florida here? I just got another comment about Florida out of the woods. I had a comment earlier that said they feel like they're hearing conflicting information. There's some people that say Florida needs to monitor, others that say Florida is completely clear. They're looking for some clarity on what the truth is.
Florida is clear from having any direct impact from the storm. That the ocean will be noticeably agitated, and especially next week, especially north of from Palm Beach County north, you'll get high swells, rip currents, and so forth. And even in South Florida, you'll get some, but the Bahama Bank tends to protect Miami-Dade and Broward County and part of Palm Beach County. Where the Bahamas Islands are, that kind of cuts down on the swells that are coming from the east. If they come from the northeast, they can come down and get through the Bahamas, but it limits what gets to Miami-Dade and Broward County and southern Palm Beach County. But north of there, you don't have anything to protect the coastline. So big hurricane out in the Atlantic puts energy toward the coast. But in terms of a direct impact, there's no indication of that. Okay, so we have the update here. So I'll just more or less read it to you here. It says, like the last couple of days, Melissa's structure is degraded once again this afternoon. And the center, the low-level circulation, is off on the west side, as we have seen, of the thunderstorms. This structure is consistent with a storm that has got this hostile upper-level winds that is tilting the system over. And they have a thing called a scatterometer, it's like a radar from space that they can measure wind speed with, indicated the center itself is broad with an asymmetric wind field. In other words, it's just almost not like a tropical system, more like a non-tropical system, because it's being kind of torn apart. Initial intensity set at 45 miles per hour. No substantial change to any of the measurements. The NOAA research plane, the P3 aircraft, is on its way, and we'll check it out this evening, and we'll get a detailed understanding, because that has a special Doppler radar built into it, the tail Doppler radar, so we can see more detail there. So it's moving very slowly. Initial motion very slow, north-northwest at only 2 miles an hour. So slow motion over the last day or so is related to it being caught between the two high pressure systems that we talked about, if you've been watching us here this afternoon. And the combined influences of the two highs is roughly canceling out. One is pushing from the south, one is pushing from the north, and well, actually, as you're looking at it, kind of this way. And so the system can't move. So much of the hurricane, so we have some very specific hurricane specific computer models. So you know about the European, the GFS, and now we know about the AI models, the Google DeepMind, the European AI, and so forth. Well, we actually have very specific hurricane models. So when you see a storm being called an invest, that triggers these specific models. And it says that they're called hurricane regional models. The guidance suggests that another reformation could occur tonight. So they're high resolution, based right on the storm, as opposed to looking at the weather pattern all around the Earth. The track guidance envelope has a distinct bend to the northeast in 24 hours. So it says that now there is this sort of drift to the northeast. And the thinking is that because of, let me go back to the satellite here, because of all this thunderstorm activity out in here, I guess, that maybe the center is going to kind of pop over here. So the thing is, all this popping around to the center does indeed affect where it ends up downstream. But let's see what they say going forward. Giving large convective bursts. So when you see them refer to a convective burst, that's cluster of thunderstorms just east of the current broad center. It's feasible that it may nudge the short-term track east of due north. In the next day or so, a mid-level ridge occurring over Mexico is expected to expand poleward of the storm. So putting that in English, the high that's over here is forecast to kind of branch out like that, putting a push like that. So if the system moves a little north, then that's going to push it back here over the next few days. That's the idea. It's a weak area of high pressure. How far north Melissa gets before it turns to the west continues to remain uncertain. A notable change from this morning is that the Google DeepMind model, which was previously on the north side of the track, abruptly shifted to the southwest side and now very close to the European model. So if we were, let's go down and take a look at that. We can, let me see the moisture. There we go. Okay, here we go. So here we're going to see that's the Google DeepMind model. So what you're seeing there is here you can see this, moving around in here. This is all kind of stalled or moving not much. And then most of these lines go over here and then go up there. And if I go forward here, I'm going to add the European and the GFS. Then I'm going to show you the average that involves the European and GFS. Then here is the average of all those Google DeepMind models. So the average, this is how we make forecasts these days, by the way. For most of our lives, we've looked at a definitive forecast. Here's the European forecast. It goes there. There's the GFS. We don't do that anymore. Now we look at this broad range and we take an average. And the average turns out to be the best forecast, better than any one. So what the discussion from the Hurricane Center is talking about, and let me see, I think I can zoom in here and we can get a kind of better look, is notice that the average of the Google forecast now is to make kind of a loop in here and then resume that, move to the west, to the south of Jamaica, and then come over the island, the west end of the island, more or less. So you see that reflected in the National Hurricane Center cone because what the Google AI model is saying more or less lines up with what the European model is saying, and the GFS model is more or less dismissed in this case. So bottom line is none of this is important in the details. The point is that it's stalled there, and then once it gets to moving, the idea is it moves west somewhere south of Jamaica. Question is, where? Is it up here? If it's up here, then a long duration of stronger winds. The farther south it is, the better. But obviously the cone is wide. The cone includes all of Jamaica, so we can't definitively say that. Okay, let's see. Talking about the hurricane regional models, shifted their tracks further north and east and related to this center. So anyway, just taking all that average that you saw what the cone is there, you see it there from the Hurricane Center. The idea is if you go down the center of that cone, it's somehow up like this, and in this area or in here, somewhere in there is the storm moving past Jamaica. So it turns out the net of this forecast takes Melissa just south of Jamaica in 60 to 96 hours, and that it's worth noting that the guidance aids that it moves near or over Jamaica earlier in the forecast. Some of them do. So the point is, this is either, in this case, if it were to do something like this, then it's bad in Jamaica. If it does what many of the models indicate, it's just worse, and maybe very much worse. Talking about the structure, let me see who wrote this, by the way. This is Philippe Patton, who writes really good discussions. If you want to learn some meteorology, read Philippe's discussions on the Hurricane Center website. Melissa's broad and asymmetric structure argues against much short-term intensification, though the shear that has been plaguing the system is soon expected to decrease and likely take at least 24 hours for the storm's tilted structure to become better aligned, take advantage of the other favorable to the storm environmental factors, the very warm water temperatures, and the very moist environment. Regardless, the intensity guidance is insistent that Melissa is going to undergo a period of rapid intensification. All 50 members of the Google DeepMind ensemble show the system becoming at least Category 3 or stronger. And the National Hurricane Center intensity forecast will follow suit, showing rapid intensification from 36 hours. So 36 hours from now, we're talking early on Saturday, to 72 hours that we're talking about through Sunday into Monday, intensifying Melissa from a tropical storm to a Category 4 hurricane in that time period. So Monday and Tuesday, their forecast is for it to be 145 mile an hour tropical hurricane, Category 4 hurricane. So extremely dangerous. And the key messages, Jamaica is at risk of a prolonged multi-day period of potentially damaging winds, heavy rainfall resulting in life-threatening flash flooding, numerous landslides, and storm surge. And that threat continues to increase for Jamaica. All right, any last thoughts there, Jordan, before we wrap up for today?
No, I think that you really did a good job explaining everybody's kind of understanding, getting it. Everybody's asking, how can they keep in touch with you? How can they tune in? Obviously, everyone wants to keep updated on the latest stuff coming in for this storm.
All right, well, so the first thing you can do is go to foxweather.tv, and that's going to tell you how to watch Fox Weather, where you're going to get continuous coverage of the storm, including coverage from Jamaica. So you're going to just go foxweather.tv, and then you can use your phone, you can use your iPad, you can use your computer, you can use your TV, your Roku, your Apple device, any kind of device you have. You're going to be able to get Fox Weather for free for continuous coverage. You can also go to foxweather.com. So that was foxweather.tv for all those instructions on how on your particular device you can, watch Fox Weather. If you go to foxweather.com, you're going to get complete coverage, and anything that I do, either write or videos, I produce, and we'll be producing videos that will appear on foxweather.com. They'll be on YouTube, be on Facebook, on my Facebook page. They'll be on X, on TikTok. And you'll be able to follow us that way with specific videos. But the continuous coverage will be on Fox Weather, which you can also watch live continuously on foxweather.com or on your phone. If you have the app, go in the upper right and just click Watch It Live, and you'll just see the channel. Obviously, in Jamaica, the problem is that power is no doubt going to eventually become a problem. And the bottom line in Jamaica is tomorrow is your day to get to a safe place. Going from east to west, obviously this will increase from east to west. It's probably going to take into the weekend, a good part of the weekend before the western part of Jamaica is significantly affected. But dramatic and really just significant impacts are expected on the western end of Jamaica eventually, based on everything we know. The only way that wouldn't happen is if the storm turned north sooner over the middle of the island or something before it got to the western part of Jamaica. Can't rule that out, but that's not in the cards right now based on the best information that we have. So let's wrap up for today, and stay with us on all the platforms. We're going to be there producing videos and also live coverage from Jamaica. And of course, much analysis and help as we can give you, we'll do it right here. So good luck to everybody in the Caribbean. We'll be thinking about you. And if you're in Florida, don't worry. Just be careful at the beach, and anywhere in the Gulf, no problem. No problem in Mexico, Belize, or points west. This is really a Caribbean problem. In the southeastern Bahamas, stay in close contact with the Bahamian Met Service, because they'll keep you up to date. We've got some time to understand exactly what the impacts are going to be there. That's going to be next week. All right, take care, everybody, and stay in touch.